welcome to the fourth episode of the Next Candidate podcast. I'm your host, Jemima Ayub, and today I have a very special guest with me, Lyle Shelton. Lyle has been a councillor on the Toowoomba City Council since the year 2000. He has been the Managing Director of the Australian Christian Lobby from 2013 to 2018 and is currently the National Director of the Family First Party. Welcome, Lyle.
Thanks very much, Jemima. It's great to be with you.
Now, just briefly, would you like to go over what you've done in politics and especially the conservative Christian cause over your political career?
Well, in one sense, I haven't really had a political career. I've been a political activist. I've been someone on the edges of politics, trying to influence politics for the sort of values that Christians in particular and conservative Australians care about. The primacy of the family in public policy, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the pro-life agenda. I've been involved in campaigns to uphold the dignity of women when it comes to strip clubs and so-called adult entertainment, a whole range of things. So these are things that I've been passionate about since I was a teenager, and my working life has taken me in a direction, I should say, through local government, through Australian Christian Lobby, and now Family First, where I've been able to be involved in fighting many of these culture war battles.
Now, it would be safe to assume that obviously you're a Christian and you centre family values very close to both your activism and, I'd assume, your personal life also. So we always speak about cancel culture and wokeism, but we never really determine the people behind the words. So, to you as an individual, what would losing the freedom of religion or the freedom of speech or the freedom to have a normal family, what would that mean to you?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. To lose the ability to speak to our children and teach them our values would be a devastating thing for millions of parents in Australia, not just Christian parents. And, we saw recently with Andrew Thorburn, the CEO of Essendon, who lost his job within 24 hours simply because he was the chairman of a church board that believed in marriage between a man and a woman and that human life in the womb deserved human rights. So he was cancelled because of that. And so it's becoming more and more difficult for those of us who believe that marriage is between one man and one woman for life, and that children deserve the love of mother and father wherever possible, and that the unborn should be protected, and all the good values that flow from those things. Those values are now become anathema in our society, and you can lose your job simply for having an association with a church that preaches those things. Now, if you'd have told me when I was a kid that this is where Australia would end up when I was an adult, I would never have believed it. I always believed this was a free country and a tolerant country, and one which would not only tolerate those views, but that those views would be supported by the majority of people. And I think probably deep down they are, but a very noisy minority has a big megaphone, and they are bullying people in the public square, bullying people out of their jobs simply because they hold values which up until 5 minutes ago in our history were held dear by the vast majority of our population.
Yeah, now it's interesting to note that you've seen the drastic change since your childhood. Well, I'm only 16, and I could say that if you told me that 90% of what's happened in the past 5 years would happen, I would call you a liar, because even in the past 10 or so years, so much has changed so fast. Everything the Coalition for Traditional Marriage fought for, and everything they said would happen if we did pass same-sex marriage, which we did, has come to pass, from Christian schools being attacked to reverends being attacked to parents not being able to raise their kids as they'd like to. It's all come to pass. So I think it might be a good idea that we start listening to the conservative side of politics, since they've got so much right on the cultural war fronts already. I think it might be a good idea for the apathetic majority of Australians who seem to not care much about politics or what goes on to start taking note to what we are saying will happen in future.
No, you're absolutely right, Jemima. Your observation is spot on. And look, I'm a little bit older than you, and I'm interested that as someone who is 16, and you're doing an amazing job for someone so young, I really gives me great hope for the future that there's young people like yourself thinking like this. But your observations are spot on. I was involved, as you know, in the campaign to preserve the definition of marriage back in 2017 and in the years leading up to that. And just as you said, everything that our campaign predicted would happen if you redefine marriage and law has happened. It's only happened much quicker than what we thought it would. And as soon as same-sex marriage came in, the activists straight away went after Christian schools. They tried to bring in legislation into the federal parliament to take away the freedom of Christian schools to employ teachers who share their values about marriage. Ballarat Christian College was gone after by same-sex marriage activists who had a big city legal firm, Clayton Utes, went after their board. And we've seen school after school, City Point Christian College, Westside Christian College, many others come under pressure simply because they want to uphold what the parents believe about marriage and teach that to the children in those schools. And this is very much under threat as a result of redefining marriage. And we warned about this before the 2017 marriage plebiscite. But people like Tony Abbott's sister, Christine Foster, who's a lesbian, she was one of the key leaders in that debate. She said over and over again, no, these concerns by the Coalition for Marriage are furphies, they're red herrings, it's not going to happen, Christian schools won't have their rights impinged on. Well, that was a big fat lie because the ink wasn't dry on the legislation before they started going after them. And it's been 5 years of persecution of Christian schools, and it's only accelerating. And it's not just Christian schools, it's parents' rights to have their children shielded from radical transgender ideology at school. There's a whole lot of stuff that flies under that rainbow flag, LGBTIQA+, and that whole kaleidoscope of political ideology is now going after our children from a very young age, whether it's through drag queen story time, trying to normalise transgender concepts and sexualised concepts to little children, right through to encouraging teenagers to take puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. So this is where this political movement has taken our nation in a very, very short period of time, and young people are being harmed as a result of it. And it's a very serious situation, and we should have spoken up. More people should have spoken up. More people should have listened. But silence was what we got, and we're reaping we're reaping the fruit of being silent at critical times in our culture.
Yeah, and that's so true, especially on the point of Christian schools. I might also add it was brushed upon by some in the Coalition for Traditional Marriage, but I think it's had more of an effect than most people realise. That most Christian schools have actually just gone silent on the issues of gay marriage and transgenderism. So although it hasn't been legislated yet, it's kind of the fear of these activists who were really inspired by the yes vote, by, mind you, a supposedly conservative government. They're so inspired that now they've struck fear into schools and even churches, which were quite firm on their beliefs. And now they're unwilling to speak. So whether it be via legislative change or just general fear tactics used by the left, Christian schools and churches have been silenced in regards to the debate on not only sexuality but also gender identity.
You're absolutely right. They have been silenced. They have been cowered into silence and made to be fearful because no one wants to have their reputation as a Christian school or as a Christian individual or a church or a pastor or no one wants to be seen as a bigot or a hater. But as soon as you say that you don't agree with, boys being in the girls' toilets at school or, children being taken on the journey down the path to the gender clinic, as soon as you say that, they cry bigot, they cry homophobe, they cry transphobe, and that scares people out of the debate. And they've constructed this caricature now, particularly of Christian schools and churches, as being anti a certain class of people. And that's been a really pernicious thing because I don't know any Christians who hate people who have a different view of human sexuality or different view of gender. We don't agree with their idea of human flourishing and the political implications of their ideas, which are pushed in the public square. We should be allowed to debate this. But as soon as you debate it, they personalise it and say, no, you're a hater. You hate people. You hate trans kids or whatever. You're causing them to commit suicide. They play these highly emotional cards to try and stop people participating in a public debate so that they can have a free pass and legislate and advocate for these things, which really should be debated more widely, because we know that the transgender agenda is harming children. We know that that's happened all over the world, but they've recognised it, particularly in the UK, where they've shut down the Tavistock Gender Clinic because they recognised that giving puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to children was harmful. And so a leading paediatrician, Dr. Hilary Cass, recommended that the clinic be shut down, and it was. Now, Australian gender clinics are still operating with impunity, and this debate hasn't reached Australia yet, but it needs to, because our kids are being harmed. And speaking out against it doesn't make you a bigot, doesn't mean you hate anyone. It just means you're concerned that there's an ideology which hasn't been properly discussed, which is causing damage.
Yeah, now it's very interesting that you mentioned all the names they like to hurl at us. Now, I personally find that bigot is the most common one. Now, I've actually pulled up the Oxford Dictionary's definition of the word bigot, and it's an unreasonable attachment to a belief, opinion, or faction, in particular prejudice against a person or group of people on the basis of their membership of a particular group. Now, just using the case of Andrew Thorburn, you could say that Andrew himself has never, at least publicly, called for the resignation of any gay person, any trans person, or of anyone, in fact, for any membership they had been part of or any group they had been part of. He hadn't chased them, he hadn't held to the belief to the point in which he wanted them to cease to exist in public life. Though the other side has literally detested him and his beliefs and affiliations to the point in which they can't even stand the notion of him being in public life. So just if we're going to go to the dictionary and just use their definition of the word bigot, there is a bigoted party in that, but I doubt it's Andrew Thorburn or any Christian for that matter.
Look, you said that really well, Jemima. I couldn't agree more. Andrew Thorburn, the CEO of Essendon, who lasted 23 hours. In his former role, or one of his former roles, he was I believe, the chief executive officer, or certainly a senior executive at the National Australia Bank, which was the first to sponsor the Gay Pride round in the AFL. Now, I don't think Andrew Thorburn should have done that or participated in it. I think that's a mistake. That's my view. I don't think we need identity politics in sport, but this is a guy who has a track record of supporting the gay community, and yet because he's in a church that believes that marriage is between one man and one woman and that human sexuality should be expressed in the construct of heterosexual marriage for life, which has always been the tradition or Christian view. It's the view of Judaism. It's the view of Islam. It's the view of many cultures and religions. And yet, because he's in a church that believes that, his previous track record of supporting the gay community doesn't amount to a hill of beans, and he's kicked out. And you're right to reach for the dictionary definition of bigot, because it doesn't apply to Andrew Thorburn. What we saw recently with his sacking as CEO of Essendon was anti-religious bigotry, not anti-gay bigotry. And this is where we've come to as a society. These people who preach tolerance are the biggest hypocrites when it comes. It's shown their real agenda, which is to make everyone bow to their particular vision of human flourishing, despite the fact that there are many debatable aspects to their vision of human flourishing, particularly as it affects children.
Yeah, it's very fascinating that they claim to be the protectors, the ones who want to allow people to be themselves. It's one of their favorite phrases, do what makes you feel good, things like that. But when it comes to like people of faith especially, they no longer want that. And another point that I'd say is interesting to note is they don't really hide the fact that they absolutely hate Christianity. Like, for example, one of the AFL women players, she's is the Islamic faith, and she has chosen to sit out a Pride Month. From both social media and the media, like media articles released about her, there was nothing extremely negative written. While the Manly Seven, as they are dubbed, did literally the exact same action in refusing to participate in the round, and they were fully demonised. And I actually had gone to the game and I'd watched the reaction, and like the reporters there, the crowd jeering against them, are so vehemently opposed to them because of their views on homosexuality, but they refuse to do the same for people of other faiths, of which they seem to proclaim higher than Christians. And I had a pastor on a few weeks ago, and one of the comments he made is through trying to legislate away Christianity, they're actually harming their own cause to promote interfaith. And if you think about it, that's true. They want to essentially, though they want to attack Christians through the legislation they want to put through, they're going to also have to target other faith-based organisations that they apparently support.
Yeah, this is you've put your finger on a really important issue here, because you've got a Muslim player, as you said, who wants to exercise her freedom of religion and boycott the Pride Month, as she should. And yet, as you say, when the Manly Seven wanted to do that, all hell broke loose, and it was a massive media storm. There's been no media storm around this Muslim AFLW player, and good on her for taking the stand. I admire it, but it shows that, as you said, there's a double standard here where only Christians seem to be being attacked for their religious views, for their views on sexual morality. The Muslims are not attacked for it. I think we have to ask why. Why is that? Why doesn't the woke left go after Islam? Why is it only Christianity that they want to attack? And I think this is really concerning. If you've got, a group in society being singled out by powerful figures in the media, academia, politics, and we're singled out because of our religion. Well, history has shown that's not a good thing, and we should be learning from history. And this double standard needs to be called out.
Yeah, like all legalized discrimination and all the tragic events of world history, none of them happened overnight. It just started by slow hatred sown throughout the community, and then the community started hating a group, and then the hate of the group eventually led to almost every single tragedy in human history. It was never just we wake up and one group is persecuted for X, Y, and Z.
Exactly. And the thing that concerns me, Jemima, is we're seeing both sides of politics condemning the Christian worldview when it comes to human rights for the unborn and marriage. I was probably the thing that shocked me most about the Andrew Thorburn saga wasn't Dan Andrews, calling Christians bigots. You expect Dan Andrews, the Victorian Premier, to do that. He's a very radical, dangerous lefty. But Peter Dutton, the leader of the Liberal Party, said that this pastor, the pastor from City on a Hill, whose sermon was dug up, and this was simply a sermon that said that human sexuality was to be expressed in marriage between a man and a woman, not through homosexuality. Now, that's people may not like that. Some people may not like that, but that's the Christian, the the view of Judaism, of Islam. That's a view that's been around for thousands of years, uncontroversially. But Peter Dutton said that was abominable. He said the pastor's view on abortion, human rights for the unborn, was abominable. That's what scared me the most, seeing the leader of the Liberal Party throw the pastor of City on a Hill, an Anglican church, under the bus for traditional Christian or traditional religious views on marriage and human rights for the unborn. That, to me, was the shocking thing. And it shows how far our society has slipped, when even the conservative side of politics will not defend and say that Christians have the right to express those views in public.
And even on that point, even within the Liberal Party, you would expect moderates like Matt Keane or Simon Birmingham to spew hatred like that in regards to Christianity or the conservative cause. But Peter Dutton is supposedly a conservative himself. He's claimed that multiple times. It's almost been the basis of his political career, and even in his even apparently on gay marriage, he had claimed to have not made up his mind till after the postal vote. So it's very interesting to see how, like, even as a person within politics, he's changed so much in only a few years.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm just getting a bit more light here. No, you're exactly right. It's very frightening. I don't like the use of the term moderates to describe people like Matt Keane and Simon Birmingham, and I know, and that's not having a go at you, Jemima. That's what the media describe them as. But if you think about this, a moderate is not someone who thinks that a child, should go off to a gender clinic, to have her breasts removed, or surgery on her genitals, or be given, life altering puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, which is what which is the ideology that the so-called moderates have signed up to in the Liberal Party. So these people are not moderates; they are radicals, and unfortunately, they are the ones who hold sway in the Liberal Party on social policy. And I'm sure that was in large part why Peter Dutton felt that whilst he was trying to defend Andrew Thorburns, from being sacked, and good on him for that, but in doing so, he felt that he had to throw the Christian worldview on marriage and family and human life under the bus in no uncertain terms, saying it was abominable. Now, that is chilling. The Liberal Party is supposed to stand for the family. That Robert Menzies, who founded the Liberal Party, would be rolling in his grave to have heard Peter Dutton say what he said last week about Andrew Thorburn.
And that's the issue with the Liberal Party, is they have this persona of being conservative and standing up for family and human rights. At least with Labor and the Greens, you know what you're getting when you vote for them. You know that they oppose it. You know that life is not going to be easy for Christians or conservatives when they are elected. But with the Liberal Party, they fooled a lot of people, especially with election promises of religious freedoms, which they didn't uphold.
That's right.
Because of I don't like calling them progressive, because they really don't want us to. Progress is supposed to be positively going forward. They seem to want us to be dragged back into the Middle Ages. So I like to call them the progressive left, which are pulling the party from both the media and from other political parties, which they apparently have now formed a de facto coalition with.
Jemima, the longer this podcast goes, the more I'm in awe of your brilliant understanding of this cultural moment and what's happening in our politics, because you're exactly right. These people are not progressive. They're not moderates, as we said earlier. Yet the left have hijacked the language, and essentially they are calling black white and white black, using language like moderates and progressives. And what I've observed, and I think you're observing it too, is that there's a political clique that runs Australia, and it's comprised of the left of the Liberal Party, which is these so-called moderates and progressives, which really are radicals. They all believe the same thing on social policy, whether it's the left of the Liberal Party, whether it's the Labor Party, whether it's the Greens or the Teals. There's a political quad that runs Australia now, and conservative thinking is very much pushed to the margin. There are a few voices in the Liberal Party, like Senator Matt Canavan, Senator Alec Andy, former Senator Amanda Stoker, and others, just to name a few. They are trying to fight for what were the traditional Liberal values. They have become marginalised voices in the wilderness, whereas the quad of the so-called progressives in the Liberal Party, Labor, Greens, and Teals, their views on rainbow ideology, their views on destroying our energy economy. They're the views that hold sway in the body politic in this nation at the moment, and it's right across all of those four groupings in our politics. And sadly, it's holding sway in the Liberal Party. So there really is no opposition to the harmful, dangerous, socially dangerous, and economically dangerous agenda that's being pushed by our political class at this time.
Now, to combat the push to the left, which the Liberals have unfortunately fought for, multiple minor conservative parties, with many of which have religious ties to the Judeo-Christian ethic by minimum, and many of which have the majority of their members being Christians themselves, and obviously assumedly holding to the beliefs of the Bible, have formed, especially in Victoria. I looked at the Victorian Electoral Commission, and I think there's almost a dozen which would make the cut for centre-right minor party this coming Victorian election. You're with Family First, which is one of those parties running.
Yep.
So what do you think minor parties need to do to ensure they don't cancel each other out with?
Yeah, that's another brilliant question, Jemima. I don't think there's quite a dozen. There's we were going through these today with our team. There's the DLP, which is probably very similar in values to Family First. So they're a small micro party like us. I wouldn't put the Animal Justice Party in our category. There's a party called the Freedom Party that does have some similarities. I know Aidan McClendon, who's one of the leaders there. There's the Liberal Democratic Party. Now, they're libertarians, so whilst we agree on many issues of freedom, they would probably go too far on, issue of drugs, abortion, euthanasia. That's right. You're well informed. So they're a little bit out there. Whilst we'd agree with them on some small government things and economic issues, some of their social policies are a bit extreme. There's a whole bunch of others. There's the UAP, United Australia Party, which would have some similarities. And there's One Nation. One Nation is a little bit inconsistent on pro-life issues. Pauline Hanson has supported euthanasia in the past. So I guess, yes, you're right. There is a bit of a fragmentation there. And of course, I'm going to say as Family First representative that, we're the best, we're the purest in terms of what's on offer for, conservatives and people of faith. But to your question, we are talking to all of the parties that share similar values, and we are working very hard to make sure that the preference arrangements we come to don't harm each other, that our preferences go to like-minded parties so that at least one of us, gets up in the particular areas where we're running. So that's the intent. And if people follow our how to vote cards, then that intent should be realised.
Yeah, because after the federal election, I looked at the statistics for a while, and I calculated all the parties which could be deemed conservative or the right or centre. Their total vote as a percentage was around 15%, and the Greens' total vote was around 15% too. The Greens got 16 members in total across both houses, and the combined group of the Conservative minor parties got 3. And it's quite a shocking statistic to look at how theoretically there's the same number of people who support the Conservative cause as the people who support the leftist cause, though it's just not seen in Parliament.
Yeah, look, that is a shocking statistic, and I think it goes to the fact that as Conservatives, we are very independently minded. We are fractured. We're not as united as the left, and the left are very good at papering over their divisions. You don't have to scratch too deep to realise that there's a lot of hatreds and animosities in the left of politics, but they do a much better job of papering it over. They've also been at this a lot longer than us. As Conservatives, we are late. As usual, we're late to the party because Conservative people of faith, we're just out there living our lives, trying to raise our families, and suddenly we've realised that politics has been overrun by people who are trying to destroy our very civilization, trying to destroy what it means, to be a family, what it even means to be a human creature, male or female. Everything is under attack. Our energy system is under attack by trying to put in place technologies that don't work. And there's nowhere in the world where they work, and yet we're doing things to harm ourselves when there's no viable alternatives. There's a whole range of crazy things going on driven by the left of politics, and we've suddenly woken up, and so a bunch of parties have sort of formed to try and combat it. I think in time we will coalesce. I think events like the Conservative Political Action Conference, which you and I were both at recently in Sydney, That's been terrific to bring people together, both the Conservatives and the Liberal Party, those of us in minor parties, in think tanks, advocacy groups. So we're talking to each other. I think we're realising, where the areas of unity lie, and I think movements like that will give us great hope for us to coalesce better and to make sure we don't fragment that vote. And at least, it's a free country, so people are going to be free to start up political parties, but we've got to make sure that we do. Ensure the preferences work in a way that we don't undermine our cause. Because You're right, we've got the same political clout numerically as the Greens, but we don't have the same parliamentary representation.
Now, when it comes to the Greens, I can hardly say this, other than their views on gambling, there is literally nothing I agree with them on. But I do have to admit their campaigns and the way they're able to cover up their many, many, many faults and idiocies is absolutely impeccable. And if we could take that as a Conservative movement, which I believe CPAC had aimed to achieve, or you will be achieving over the next few years, which I don't assume will only become worse for Conservative values. If we could just take that kind of notion and energy that they have for their political cause, which is quite bad, both theoretically and in practice, I reckon we could be a whole lot more successful than them, because just speaking to your average Australian, they agree with our movement. They're more apathetic than ignorant. They know it's happening, but they don't care, in my experience.
You're absolutely right. I think if the average Australian could get better media access to better media coverage that was unfiltered and that wasn't distorting and putting out, fake news, to be quite frank, about Conservative issues, I think Australia would be a different place. But I think we're poorly served by the media, and our population is fairly apathetic. Australians just want to get on with having a good life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in a democracy, if we don't tend to the garden, the weeds will grow, and that's what's happened. And if we want freedom, we've all got to participate, at least at a minimal level of being aware of what's going on and making sure we vote the right way. And I think we've been a bit negligent, particularly on the Conservative side, and we've allowed the weeds to grow, and things are a bit of a mess at the moment. I'm hopeful that these new movements and parties like ours will be part of that awakening.
On the topic of the upcoming Victorian election, which is only just over a month and a couple of weeks away, I thought I'd mention a bit of Daniel Andrews' track record. Obviously, we don't have the next 20 years to go through it all, but the highlights would probably be his change or suppression conversion practice prohibition bill 2020, as well as his obviously long, extremely restrictive lockdowns and vaccination mandates, which he imposed on the Victorian people. Now, the change of suppression bill literally stated that prayer had been prohibited. They called it prayer-based therapy. I don't think there should be a wrong way to pray. Whether you're Christian or Islamic or Jewish, I think even like Hindus and Buddhists, they all pray. Whether we agree with their form of prayer or who they're praying to is irrelevant to the subject of religious freedoms. Whether you're right or wrong in your prayer, you should still be allowed to pray freely in a democratic country. And the fact that he had the audacity to quite literally ban prayer and literally put the words in writing is quite shocking on his own character.
It's absolutely shocking, Jemima, because not only is prayer banned, if someone who's struggling with their sexuality or their gender identity comes and asks for prayer, that's illegal. Even if the person themselves instigates a request for prayer, to pray for that person at their request is against the law. To help them in any way, if they say, I'm struggling with my gender identity, can you help me? I don't really want to go to the gender clinic. What else can I do? And if you suggest something other than going to the gender clinic, where where a child could be given puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, or have irreversible surgery, you can go to jail, 10-year jail sentences. And this is shocking. And it's in your face. on the Victorian Human Rights and Equal Opportunities website, it actually says if even if someone asks for help and you help them, you are breaking the law. A parent who tries to talk their child out of going to the gender clinic can be criminalised as a result of these laws. It's the most shocking thing I've ever seen in my life, probably after the issue of abortion. This is the most shocking and brazen laws on our books, and there's many other things we could say about Daniel Andrews as well. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but
The rap sheet never ends.
It never ends. It never ends. But people should be shocked about this. I mean, I should mention too, also on the Victorian Education Department website, it tells teachers that if a child wants to transition their gender at school and don't want their parents to know, the teacher should hide that from the parents. Now, teachers should hide nothing from a parent, let alone something as serious as a child wanting to change their gender. But this is there in black and white on the Victorian Education Department website. In Victoria, Daniel Andrews will transition your child without your knowledge. He thinks he owns your kids. This is something out of Soviet Russia. It's unbelievable.
Now, I don't know about other people, but when I was younger, my parents always told me, if anyone tells you to keep a secret from me, there's a very, very high chance they're a very, very bad person, and you obviously shouldn't do it. I don't think enough kids are taught that. I think that's a very good principle across the board. But the fact that the government is now encouraging keeping secrets from your parents, that is just so creepy and so wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know how any level-headed parent would be okay with that. And I think I don't know how to say this without sounding unnecessarily cruel to parents who may support someone like Daniel Andrews. But if you support somebody who is literally telling your children to keep secrets from you and to be so secretive behind your back, how could you ensure that you're fulfilling your role as a parent to ensure that your children aren't in harm's way? Because from just deciding that you want to be a boy or girl or changing your gender, and the new thing is becoming a furry, which if you haven't heard of it, it's people, especially teenagers, I find, who have decided they identify as a cat or dog. If it starts with that, and a teacher is all right with telling a student to keep that as a secret, what will it escalate to, and what kind of can of worms has the government opened?
It's opened a big can of worms, Jemima, and look, the epidemic of children we're seeing presenting at gender clinics is testament to that. As you say, we've had children in Australia going public saying they identify as a cat. This is just beyond comprehension. It shows the fact that this is taken seriously, both the idea of gender fluidity and now species fluidity. Where does this all end? And the fact that this is taken seriously by media and academics, by politicians, by woke corporations like the Essendon Football Club, it just shows that as a society we've collectively lost our mind. And those of us who haven't, and who I believe are in the majority, the silent majority, if we don't start speaking, we're going to be further overrun by this madness. And it's time for a revolt, for resistance. And I'm talking about using all the legal means, use the tools of democracy. We should never use violence. We should be civil, but we should be firm and we should be strong in calling this out. And if we don't do this soon, it's going to be too late.
Yeah, now, as you've said, there are plenty of legal ways, and we really don't need violence to prove our point. Like, for example, I'd say 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had our March for Life in Sydney, and not many people rocked up. And I personally know quite a number of people who would oppose the intentional killing of a child. Now, using that to describe abortion cannot be disputed by anyone who relies on empirical evidence. An unborn child has all the signs of life, and ending their life is killing. So whether you believe that's moral or not, I suppose you can start an argument about it. The left likes to start those kind of arguments. And I actually have more respect for a person who goes, yes, it is killing, but I believe it's morally justifiable. I still can't comprehend their arguments, but I guess we live in a free democracy and they are owed free speech. Then a person who says that abortion doesn't kill a child, because that's a blatant lie. And I think that's part of our problem. The problem is that truth have become lies and lies have become truth, which has turned us into a very apathetic society, which has allowed us to promote ignorance amongst ourselves, especially politically, which has resulted in a lot of issues.
Yeah, exactly. Look, if someone like yourself who's 16 years of age, which is still pretty young, if you can work all this out, why can't adults work it out? The evidence is empirical, as you say. It's not difficult. It just takes some critical thinking. And yet, smarter people than you or I are silent. Well, I'll speak for myself. Smarter people than me are silent. And what disturbs me, Jemima, is that many Christian leaders are silent on these issues and they're afraid to talk about them in their pulpits. They're afraid to challenge the authorities. We see people saying, no, let's just preach the gospel. Let's not talk about politics or social issues, as if somehow the gospel doesn't apply to certain areas of life. I mean, who told us that the gospel is just meant to be put in a little corner and practice there, but it should just ignore what's going on in the society? I mean, Christian people historically have always been at the forefront of fighting injustice, whether it was slavery through William Wilberforce, who was told to keep his religion to himself. Thankfully, he didn't listen to those people who said, just, preach your religion in church, don't come into Parliament with it. Well, he set slaves free all over the world. Dietrich Bonhoeffer spoke against the Nazi regime, tried to warn the German church in the 1930s. We can't go along with this Hitler guy. He wasn't listened to. And today we are repeating similar mistakes. We are hearing church leaders say, no, let's just preach the gospel. Let's not speak out against the transgender thing, even though, young girls are having their breasts cut off and doing irreversible damage to their bodies, and children are being indoctrinated. Children are being killed in the womb. Women are being harmed and coerced into abortion. The church sits by silently while these things happen. How can we do this? It's the evidence is all in front of us, and yet we close our ears and just try and sing louder in church and ignore what's going on in the society around us. And I don't like to use this phrase because it's almost become hackneyed, but we've got to use it. The quote of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. Not to act is to act. God will not hold us guiltless. Are we not at such a moment in our society today? And every pulpit that is afraid to mention these things is complicit with them, unfortunately. And this has to change. Every politician that is silent in the public square about it is complicit with these things. All of us who are silent are complicit with these things. And that must change, because this is heading in a terrible, terrible direction.
100%. And as you mentioned, Bonhoeffer actually thought of that quote instantly. So I believe that a lot of people like to emphasize in the love of the Bible, but isn't love warning somebody that they're going to get hurt? I know quite a few girls and a couple of boys around my age who would have what would be described as gender dysphoria. Now, all those kids, I can tell you, have been through quite a bit, and I have full empathy for them. But to tell them that go and do irreversible surgeries, take hormones that are going to risk your mortality rate for multiple diseases, and this has all been proven. Every Australian citizen has the right to access their local council's library services. No one has an excuse to say that they're unable to access information. We can't use the excuse of not knowing or not being able to know. And these kids literally are being used as political pawns to make the left seem caring when they really knowingly hurt them. I don't like accusing people of doing bad things, but there is no way on earth 90% of the politicians and activists who support mutilating children know with all their hearts and minds that it's for their own good. Same goes for teaching kids that we're all going to die in 10 years, and they've been saying that for 50 years. So I guess that disproves it in itself. And you got, like, I personally know kids who have formed anxiety and depression because of believing in climate change. And to these politicians, it might be a few cheap votes here and there, but you've just ruined someone's life.
Yeah.
And they're definitely not the loving, caring life that they claim to be.
No, that's exactly right. They are causing a lot of anxiety amongst young people. They're causing them to lose hope in their future. We should be instilling hope in young people for the future. We've got a bright future. We're blessed with a planet that isn't dying at all. There's abundant resources here to provide energy and food, comfort for billions and billions of people, and to continue to raise out of poverty people in developing nations. And yet all this is being circumvented by the climate cult, by this climate catastrophism. There is no climate emergency. There's certainly, if there is an issue with human-induced carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there is time to adapt. There are technologies that we can use to adapt, but there's no need to be shutting down economies, closing down proven sources of baseload electricity, sacrificing all that for unproven technologies. We do not need to be doing this in order to save the planet. And there's plenty of smart people who are testament to that. Bjorn Lomborg, Michael Schellenberger, many others. Your audience might want to Google some of these people and look at their articles.
Jeff Grimshaw's another one. He's fantastic.
Yeah, you're probably better researching this than I am, but I'm just convinced that there is no climate emergency. We should always be looking to steward the planet in a way that is sustainable, but we have an abundance of resources for an abundance of people. People are not a plague on this planet. People are special. Human life is sacred, and we should be looking to ensure that everyone is able to live a fulfilling and meaningful life with the comforts that we've seen available to those of us in the West now for the last several decades. Every person on the planet should have the benefit of those comforts and the standard of living that has been developed over the last 100 years or so. It's been a blessing to millions and billions, and it can be a blessing to billions more. We do not have to be thinking that people are the problem and that we need to somehow cull the population or give people substandard living standards in order to save the planet in some sort of misplaced righteous cause.
Yeah, and it's even now being used as an excuse to allow abortions, which I just think is sickening.
Yeah.
So to supposedly save human lives from a catastrophe that actually doesn't exist, you have to take human life. Like I think it sums up the left and their logic. It just doesn't ever work. Another point that's interesting to note from, I'd say, Year 3 science is that the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide are human and animals when we exhale. And the biggest producers of, the biggest absorbers of oxygen are plants and fungi and things like that. And it's very interesting to note that to put up the wind and solar panels, they're chopping down a whole lot of native forest, which is it's just so counterproductive, and they just want to cripple our economy. Now, the rich inner city teals and greens and that whole climate group who've invested quite heavily, and you can look up the member privileges statements, the disclosure statements on the Parliament of Australia website to actually look into the kind of stocks they own, and quite a few of them do own stocks in the renewable industry. So either way, they're going to benefit off this, and the people who are going to suffer are the people in the third world, and even people who are on the lower scale of the socio-economic status in Australia, which is quite unfortunate because these are people who should be allowed to live the Australian dream. I think every Australian child should be able to want to grow up, own a house, own a car. In Sydney, the average house price is now 1.3 million. That's close, similar in Melbourne. So it's crossed that dream off a lot of young people's wish list.
Yeah. Look, this economic crisis we're in is completely politician-induced. It's completely unnecessary. The cost of living is going up. Electricity is about to go up by another 35% next year, they're saying. Already, that's on top of the increases we've already had. Inflation's going through the roof. Rent is going through the roof. Housing is unaffordable, and it's completely unnecessary. We live in a country of Australia with abundant natural resources, abundant sources of clean energy. If you want to go down that path, natural gas, uranium, we should have we could have free energy for all Australians if we really wanted to. It's that abundant, and we've got the biggest landmass of any developed nation on the planet. We've got a whole continent, and yet we've got a land shortage which is driving up house prices. Only governments could engineer something like this, and it's all because our policy settings are wrong. They're driven by an ideology which has become a religious cult, and we're hurting ourselves as we make sacrifices to this new God. It's a real shame because it's crueling the future of millions of young people. And as I say, it's completely unnecessary.
They want to delete the religion of Christianity, which is built Australia, and replace it with, I call it the woke cult because it covers a lot of things from gender identity theory to the right to freedom of thought, speech, expression of opinion, assembly and movement. They want to use this cult to exterminate everything the Judeo-Christian ethic has placed. Now, whether you believe in religion or not is irrelevant to the notion that Australia's constitution, our legal system, our parliaments, it was all founded on the Christian faith. So if you're deleting Christianity, what you're really doing is deleting democracy, as Christianity is the only faith which believes in free will.
Yeah, that's right. It's an anti-freedom agenda. As you say, Christianity is the religion that's provided the most freedom for the most people. And that's just by any objective look at history. Yet you wouldn't know that today because this has been so distorted by the radical left who have demonised our Western Christian inheritance. But it's Christianity that gave us the Magna Carta, which said that even kings must be subject to the law. Which gave us Parliament, gave us checks and balances on power, gave us a modern market economy, gave us a social welfare system, schools, hospitals. All of these things were driven by people of Christian faith. Any casual examination of history shows that, and yet you'd think that Christianity was some nefarious force in the world that must be eliminated. But the left, in caricaturing Christianity like this, all they're doing is abolishing our freedoms because they just want to control people and take away liberties and have state control, have some sort of globalist utopia. And of course, these sort of utopian dreams always end, I was going to say in tears, they end in genocide, in rivers of blood, as we saw with the Soviet Union, as we saw with Mao's China, as we're seeing with the way the present Chinese Communist Party is treating the Uyghurs, their jackbooted approach in Hong Kong, their desire to take over Taiwan, and the World Economic Forum, with its desire to control everything and cancel those with whom it disagrees, that they think they should use sort of pandemic measures to combat climate change now, so limit people's freedoms, turn off your air conditioner and your heater through some centrally controlled government portal. I mean, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here, but this is essentially their thinking, and it's totalitarianism, and totalitarianism always ends badly. The natural human condition is that of liberty, but not libertarianism. Liberty, where people through virtue and character are able to govern themselves with a light touch from government. You need government authority and structure, but it's there as a framework, and it doesn't work unless people are able to govern themselves. That comes from people who have virtue. Virtue comes from religion, And I think the best virtues come from the Christian religion. There's other virtues in other religions, and there's some positive things there. But I think the best ones, history shows, come from Christianity. That therefore creates a society where there's character, and where there's character, where there's integrity and honesty in the dealings between human beings. That creates a flourishing and civil society. And of course, that's what we've had up until recently, but it's breaking down at a great rate of knots. And they say that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. We need to be vigilant about tending to the garden and just, re-establishing the things which make for liberty. And it's these timeless principles.
Yeah. Now, on the topic of all virtues coming from the Bible, it's quite fascinating to note that from Gandhi to Mark Latham to Andrew Bolt, none of them believe in the Bible, but all of them believe in the Judeo-Christian ethic. And in my opinion, that's what gave them all their good views. Now, in a free country, obviously, you're not expected to believe in the Bible, but I think it should be expected that our politicians and even you Australians at least accept the Judeo-Christian ethics on which our nation is built.
Yeah, I think so. If we can't agree on unifying principles that are the basis of our nation, then our nation's in a lot of trouble. And look, when Australia was federated in 1901, the early census in that first decade of our federation showed that, somewhere in the high 90s, 96, 97% of people ticked that they were Christian on the census forms. Now, that was still in the high 80s right up until the 1960s, and it's fallen off a cliff since then. We're now below 50%. But there was a unifying ideology. If you use ideology isn't necessarily a dirty word. There was a set of ideas based around the Bible, based around Christianity, which Australians identified with. And that's what, as I said, gave us our legal system. It gave us common values. If those values are now contested or being thrown out or being sought to be cancelled, then what's replacing it? We're seeing all these crazy philosophies and ideologies that you and I have been talking about for the past hour or so on this podcast, coming in and bringing mass confusion, division. It's dividing Australians. It's creating this oppressor sort of classes. It really is quite ugly, and I think we need a greater level of civic discourse on what are the unifying values of this nation, and let's just have a bit of a reassessment. Look at where we've come from. Look at where we want to be going. Look at the sort of values that are going to take us to the desired place. And I think we abandon, Christian principles. We abandon the Bible at our peril. But at the moment, the Bible is being painted in this crazy, simplistic caricature as some sort of homophobic book. Therefore, it should be thrown in the bin. That really is such a travesty, because this book has been the foundation of great nations, and it shouldn't be discarded lightly. But this is where the dumbing down of our education system has taken us. As I said, it's put us in a very dangerous place. We don't know what we're doing, and we're causing enormous damage in this reckless pursuit of some sort of utopia that no one can really define properly.
100%, and we really do need an overhaul of the education system, along with quite a few systems of government which push all this, well, there's no other phrase to use but nonsense to describe what they're pushing for. Now, in wrapping up, if someone in the audience from Victoria would like to vote for Family First or look into their policies more before the upcoming election, where can they find you and the party?
Yeah, thanks, Jemima. They can find us at familyfirst.org.au. Go to the website there. You can see some information about what we're doing in the Victorian campaign. There's a place where people can sign up and volunteer. You can join up and receive email updates from the party. It doesn't matter where in Australia you live. You're welcome to be a supporter or a member. or a donor. And at the moment, we're encouraging all of our supporters right around the nation to get behind the campaign in Victoria, because Victoria is a laboratory for radical woke left, radical anti-family legislation and public policy. And it's in all of our interests as Australians to help the campaign down there. We'll be announcing some candidates very shortly. We've got some high-quality people running for upper house seats in Victoria, and if we can get them into the upper house and hopefully get a good crossbench of like-minded people, they can start to block Dan Andrews' bad legislation, or even perhaps start to try and turn things back again. But we desperately need people of character, people of family values, of Christian values, Judeo-Christian values in that parliament, and that's exactly what Family First is trying to do. We're asking people to consider who will fight to keep your family safe from the radical anti-family agendas that are being pushed, sadly, by all sides of politics in Victoria.
That's fantastic, and thank you so much for standing up for Victorians. I like calling it the lost cause state, and I think we should just chop out Melbourne and let it float down past Tassie or something. But I'm glad to see that there are still some people who hold hope for them and who would like to give them a future. Now, to anyone in Victoria who think we might be overreacting about the change of suppression bill, I will be including it in the description. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's most definitely real. It did pass last year. Daniel Andrews most definitely did celebrate it. He is a horrible person. I'd really caution you not to consider supporting him, and the Liberal Party in Victoria especially quite weak. So at least looking into some of your conservative minor party options may be a good idea. Now, thank you so much for joining me, Lyle, and thank you for all the work you do. Thanks for coming on.
Jemima, it's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure, and I commend you on the thoughtfulness of your questions and the very detailed research you've done in preparing for this podcast. Good on you, and I hope what you're doing receives a wide audience, not just this podcast, but obviously the excellent work you're doing. So good on you, and God bless you.
Thank you so much. Now, please like, share, subscribe. I don't think we did anything too controversial today, so you probably won't get banned from social media for sharing this on. So, see you in the next episode. Bye.